for future research and being able to help problem solve and answer some of these critical questions that are coming on board.
Okay, thank you. The chairman's been generous with the time, so I yield back.
Let's continue on that topic, Dr. Santos. Ms. Hattie, you said it was 209,000 computing jobs. 40,000 of those were in Texas in 2015 that went unfilled. And the unfortunate thing is that Texas only produced 2,100 new computer scientists that year. Even scarier fact is that only 5,100 students in high school took the AP computer science course. That is only 17% of the high schools in Texas that could offer the AP computer science course. Even more troubling, only 24% of those were women. Only a little bit over 900 were Latinos, and only 120 African Americans had taken the computer science AP course. So my question to you is, I tell millennials that coding for them is going to be like typing for my generation. If you're under the age of 45 and you don't know how to type, you're not getting a job. And in the future, if you don't have any kind of coding experience, coding is one thing, but the specific skills necessary to becoming a cybersecurity professional is a little bit different, in my opinion. So what should be done at the high school level to ensure that we're getting some of these kids? Are the curriculums there? Are you seeing the students that are coming into your program having a grounding in cybersecurity doctrine? Should this be something that we start doing at the middle school level? How do you fix it at the middle and high school level?
Well, I think that having just exposure to computing is one of the first things. Cybersecurity is another layer on top of that. So, with initiatives like Computer Science for All, that will make a difference in the understanding of the need to have education because of the pervasiveness of computer science and computing. But if you talk about starting off at the high school level, in a way that's already too late. You need to start earlier, even middle school or earlier.
So are you aware of any solid middle school programs that are out there? Because one of the things that we're looking at, the great thing is there's curriculum out there. There's curriculum. The other problem you have at the middle or high school level is a teacher that knows how to teach it. Yes. But the great thing is private sector is willing to step up and say, hey, we're going to help with some teacher training. We're going to help with understanding some of the curriculum that you can be implementing. Are you seeing some of those programs anywhere in the country at middle school? What's the best next action on getting this inculcated in middle schools?
Well, I think while there's many ideas floating on how to do this, there isn't a well-established mechanism starting at the middle school. You do see different types of curricula established in the high schools. Part of this is being able to, it's a process of growing, that the realization of instituting it at the high schools, but now that that's effective to then flow down to the middle schools. This is still a work in progress. I can see a lot of interest in relationships between public schools, universities, and corporations in order to effectively build out some sort of paradigm that can be tested and then that can be facilitated across some wide levels of schooling. The other issue that you also brought out was that we have a diversity problem in technology as well. And part of this is that we also need to figure out more of a systematic way of being able to engage students from all different backgrounds and all different interests to realize that computer science and cybersecurity education is critical for their future job prospects and their future careers. A lot of different universities and schools have built relationships with on a one-to-one basis on building things like camps and discovery camps and all of that will create the pipeline. But part of this is to be able to build this sort of life cycle of technology pipeline and there needs to be a lot of thought into the entire process. I think that universities are very interested in trying to do this more effectively, but it is, again, everyone is siloed in their own ways. Universities are siloed from high schools, they're siloed from K-8, that's siloed from industry. And there needs to be a way to break those down to communicate more effectively.
And I'd like to take this question down the line. And Mr. Corona, you talk specifically about silos in the information sharing game. But again, the private sector, when you look at your hiring process to get the right talent in the right places, it has to go further than just, a college graduate or someone who has some experience. Do you have suggestions on how we see, how we start improving that pipeline of talent going all the way back to middle school?
Well, I think one of the key things may be the STEM program. So science and technology, I can't remember the last two letters of the acronym.
Engineering and math.
Engineering, right. I think focusing a lot of that education for teachers in the STEM program so that they're aware of what to start teaching the middle school students, I think that's a good step in the right direction. Certainly getting people out of college, as we've seen, there's not enough folks getting in, so any encouragement that we could provide to get people interested in the field. And I think starting again in that middle school, getting younger kids engaged in the science aspects of it is probably a good start. But what I'm hearing from many of the financial firms is that since we don't have enough people coming out of colleges, they're looking at career change folks that may have the analytical skills and the wherewithal, the problem-solving skills that could translate well into a cyber career. So you might have help desk folks that normally get calls, have to diagnose it, have a broader view of IT. Same thing with quality and assurance testing people. They're used to diagnosing problems and testing. Those are skills that might transfer well into a cybersecurity career. So having college graduates that could now get some sort of a certification or a shorter term certification, they perhaps go to night school, that their employers could help fund, those sorts of programs I think are very useful to help augment the workforce with people that are willing to do career changes.
My last question before we go back to Ms. Kelly, is to you, Mr. Horn, and Ms. Hatter. Can we, the reality of cybersecurity is you can learn the theories in the classroom, you can do this in a lab, but you have to get your hands dirty. You have to deal with the number of attacks that you're witnessing every hour. Is there a way to get meaningful on-the-job experience for high school or college kids, and how can we pull that off? And that's a question to both of y'all. Mr. Horn, why don't you start us off?
Actually, what we have been looking at doing is actually implementing an internship program where we would bring high school and college students in and have them work side by side with the security professionals that we have. What we're seeing just in general is a lack of interest in technology areas as a whole. And what we're trying to do is to really foster that interest by some level of hands-on experience. So for example, we have recently in the IT area brought people in through the help desk to let them experience it. What is IT itself? What does a career in that mean? What does it actually touch? In other words, it isn't just Microsoft Excel and spreadsheets and that sort of thing. There's a lot more deeper technology that they need to learn, and actually it's quite interesting. So having them come in, work side by side with the professionals on a schedule, almost like a regular full-time basis, we think is going to be very helpful.
Ms. Hatter?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Horn on the intern question once you get to the college level, but the problem starts much sooner, as folks were saying earlier, and I think there would be an opportunity for you to look at nonprofit STEM advocacy groups. I know I'm on a board for one in Silicon Valley, the Silicon Valley Education Foundation, and we focus on STEM starting in junior high through high school. And I think there would be a way to look at, because there's some well-run nonprofit organizations across the country, look at how to get government support to push that forward, because there are days when we're sitting at those board meetings, it feels like you're trying to shove a noodle up a hill, but everybody's interested, so we keep going at it. But there are ways to make this better. But I would encourage you to look at some of the stronger programs like that, because there's a mutual interest there. And a lot of the organizations that I've seen in the one I participate in, as well as what I've seen with other groups, we're just trying to get basic STEM skills. It hasn't even evolved to, okay, how do we get more people in AP computer science? We're just trying to get people to take algebra right now. But the more we could consistently push in that path would be very helpful, very helpful.
Ms. Kelly.
My deputy chief of staff, who's sitting in the audience, should definitely have her chest pumped out because she started a STEM council and a STEM academy in my district. And the council is made up of elementary and college, and also people in that business. And then we have a STEM academy where we work with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders just to whet their appetite in those fields. The problem is we're a small office. We can't meet with the same kids, so we kind of go from one group of students to another just to kind of wet their whistle. And hopefully what we've done will spark something in them. They just spoke to astronauts from the International Space Center. They've gone to Museum of Science and Industry, coding, and to one of our local community colleges to learn about, I'm sure I'm forgetting, but plastics and wind turbine and all of that. And we specifically start younger just because of what you said. We also have legislation that we hope will entice people to go into the STEM fields as teachers and then teach in underserved communities, and also looking at trying to get our manufacturers to start internships and mentoring programs and things like that to wet the kids' whistle. But I think, as one of you said, that one group had to stop the program because they couldn't find the high schoolers interested, because I think they thought it was manufacturing from my grandparents' days and not the technology. But I did want to give Mr. Horn and Ms. Hatter a chance, if you could recommend, or whoever didn't speak yet, when I asked the questions, Mr. Carano and Ms. Hatter, if there were recommendations that you could make to the commission, what would they be? A couple of recommendations.
Well, I think when our cybersecurity met to talk about these items, they really did spend a lot of time talking about public education, because so much of the cyber attacks we're seeing are still low tech phishing attempts, or in the financial services, spear phishing attacks, where they're looking at social media like LinkedIn, finding the appropriate people to attack, perhaps spoofing their email and trying to initiate wire transfers and things of that nature. So having that public education is really important. And again, a lot of the contingency plans for critical infrastructure firms involve people working from home during emergency situations where perhaps their primary workplace is unavailable. So making sure that home network and those home computers are secure becomes even more important, because now we've got people that may be financial analysts or others that are doing critical functions, but not at their primary workplace. So the more secure that those places could be, the better. And again, that goes back to, programs to make sure that the public's aware of these things. Don't click on that link. And that can start at the youngest ages, right? And really should be part of school curriculum, having kids be able to recognize things that they shouldn't be doing, either online or through their social media accounts, because they're not really probably using email, they're using apps and other things to within their interactions. So the public education is a big part. I suppose some of the other things that we're concerned about is the more recent attacks to get at interbank payment and settlement systems, messaging systems like SWIFT, where really large value payments are occurring. So those are of concern, because the attackers have kind of gotten beyond the consumer accounts that they're trying to attack the interbank payment and settlement systems. And that is a huge concern, because if you look at the national GDP is about $17 trillion a year. Well, the amount of money that flows just through Fedwire on a daily basis is about $4 trillion. So it's really where a great deal of money is moving around our economy.
And Mr. Carano's point about enterprises needing to continue always train their employees, very important. It's not just training the younger kids, it's reminding everybody that's been out in the workplace of think about what link you're connecting on, because you can have all sorts of sophisticated infrastructure and you hit a link you should not be, and you're had at that point. So that's one. It's very basic, but it's the keeping the care and feeding of the infrastructure up, the employees and the infrastructure, very important. You can't let anything go unmanaged, untrained, unsecured, because you end up in a deeper hole. I would say that, we're seeing, it came up a couple of times, but, real consistent attacks per vertical, very organized attacks per vertical. Healthcare has had its bad times so far this year, and it's come up in some of the answers, but I don't think we could overemphasize how important it is to help facilitate the sharing of information, especially around verticals, because you can see waves of, whether it's ransomware or some other type of attacks that aren't sophisticated. People would have, known how to prevent those if they had all the patches and policies up to date, but that's what companies are really struggling with. So how to facilitate that sharing in a safe way across companies, across verticals, with the government would be advantageous.
One thing, I liked your idea about the National Guard, the Tech National Guard. And also, we do 2 job fairs a year. One is a general, more for adults. The second is for 15 to 24-year-olds over the summer. But my staff's probably going to kill me. But now I'm thinking, should we just have a job fair that's strictly technical for career changes, or for people in college, coming out of college? Would that be helpful?
I think so.
I yield back for now.
Ms. Hatter, my question to you, one of the things that we try to do in the subcommittee, we look at 4 areas: cybersecurity, and really in Washington, D.C., that means information sharing. Privacy, that has been the #1 national security issue of 2016. 3 is looking at IT procurement, and 4, emerging technology. And even though the Internet of Things is not emerging technology, we kind of look at it in that bucket. And my fear is that because the complexity of the interconnections when you start talking about the Internet of Things, that when one thing goes wrong, there's going to be a regulatory overreach in their response to prevent it. I think perfect example is the recent hacking of vehicles, where legislators at the federal and state level saying, "Oh, we got to prevent this from happening." Well, guess what, guys? It's really hard to still hack a car going 90 miles an hour while it's driving down the highway, right? If you give me unfettered access to it for 4 days, I'm gonna do all kinds of interesting things. How do we prevent government from getting in the way of letting the Internet of Things evolve? Because, I liken this to the debate about Ethernet and token ring. The government didn't decide which technology became predominant, right? It was the market, it was industry that did that. And my fear, this conversation on Internet of Things is going to make Ethernet versus token ring look like a pillow fight, right? And so my question is, it's hard to determine how you prevent something from happening, but do you have any opinions, thoughts, concerns about this industry and where regulation is going?
We are definitely concerned about knee-jerk reactions from an event happening here, an event happening there, and all of a sudden technology companies are getting dictated on different technology decisions. We're very concerned about that, and I agree with you. And if all things being equal, there probably would have been some bad decisions on which would have won between Ethernet and token ring, if that was not just which technology was best decision. So I personally think the more we can have people understand what is the bigger picture, how does this really fit together? It's not just one thing that we're preventing, but there's the technology is moving in different ways, and not just the more you can prevent other government agencies looking at just individual events that have happened that might make people concerned, but more think about how are we architecturally protecting this? How do we get standards in place? How do we facilitate sharing of information in ways that protect privacy, but also give other companies heads up of what's going on? It's thinking about the bigger picture and not getting distracted about individual events that might unnerve people in one way or another, because jumping to that or jumping to rash conclusions from that isn't going to be helpful.
Yeah, because it's going to exacerbate the problem that Mr. Carano brought up about all of these frameworks, these different frameworks that are out there, and you can start creating a framework for one individual piece of technology, and then you're going to have this regulatory environment that nobody is able to understand.
Right, and I think I look at the security space relative to the whole IT stack and say I believe it's more fragmented than if you look at networking or compute or storage, or even on the business application side of how things have consolidated with ERP and CRM. It's very, very fragmented with many, many more companies involved, many different vendors involved, and the industry is sort of inherently gone in a bunch of different directions. So I think the more we can, from an industry point of view, I think it's our responsibility to play more from a architecture and a platform play. I mean, we just exacerbate, from a security vendor perspective, exacerbate the problem when we make integration such a high need with all the different security products out there. We make the resource issue worse. So I know industry is already pivoting to, okay, let's look at this more architecturally. Let's look at this at more from a platform level, like the other parts of the IT stack has, which will better outcome, less resources required, because it won't be so integration dependent to get these solutions up and running.
Is anybody smart enough to create a framework that works for everyone, right? Who should do that? Because the reality is you can't prescribe specifics. It should be outcomes, right? And because the reality is, as soon as we come up with some kind of standard, that standard is already outdated because of technological change. And is it outcome-based? Is it some other way that we should be looking at what our frameworks should be based on?
Well, I don't think the government should be trying to put in the standard, but the good news is companies in that space are focusing more to let's look at this more architecturally. Let's look at this more from a platform base, as opposed to, because you guys would have felt this chasing a bunch of different individual features. So we can do more as an industry, and we are pivoting to more what other parts of the IT stack have done in the past. And then it's up to the enterprise customers to choose what they, which direction they think is best. But it's good to see the industry pivoting in that direction also. And I see the consumers on the enterprise side, the CISOs and the CIOs, sort of changing their buying behaviors also of, okay, we need something that can work together more than just chase individual point solutions.
Good copy. Mr. Horn, shifting gears slightly, information sharing. And it's a basic question. What information would you like to get from the federal government, right? And that, depending on who's asked that question, the response is going to be very different. And I think you alluded to earlier, smaller hospitals, private practitioners, they have a very different need than larger entities that may already be investing, like y'all, millions of dollars and have hundreds of people involved in cybersecurity. Because the reality is that if all actors involved in information sharing are not getting something out of the practice, then no one's going to participate. And so I think we have a a small window to make sure that the federal government is providing the kinds of things that will entice the private sector to continue to volunteer and share that information. So, one, grade my paper. Is that the right assumption? Is that a wrong assumption? And two, what is the kind of stuff that you, in defending your own networks, wish you were getting from the federal government?
Well, number one, I think you're right on in terms of the direction. I think what we need from the government is a very concise, actionable set of information that's returned to, let's say, even the smallest practice, so they can actually do something with the information. If we look traditionally at the information that's shared today, when it does get shared, it's very complex and it doesn't really have a lot of meaning to, let's say, a small operator. Okay, so I hear that such and such an exploit has occurred. What am I supposed to do with this information? So putting that information into a simple, actionable context is really what these organizations need, because it's certainly a fear that we have within Advocate. We've got very small practices that we acquire. Well, what were they doing prior to the time of acquisition? Do they have a security practice at all? Did they understand security? If they were told that there was a certain level of exploit going on, did they even know what to do about it? Or did they just put their head in the sand and let it go? And that's, I think, the biggest concern that we have. So it's a simple, concise, actionable set of information that anybody can actually apply to their organization.
Yeah, but in that case, right, some of those folks would probably value bad IP addresses to say, hey, block these IP addresses from connecting with your network. Your entity, your organization doesn't need that because you're getting that information from other private sector providers, right? So the kind of information that participants in information sharing need out of the federal government is varied, because you specifically need tactics, techniques, and procedures of APTs, right? And in a way that is quick, and you can respond in a quick fashion, right? But someone that's not as sophisticated as your network may need something even more basic than the kinds of needs that you have. And the question is how, with DHS being codified as the entity, as the focal point between the private sector and the government, how can DHS be everything to everyone?
I don't know that it can, but I think that the information that's shared can also be tiered to to a certain target audience. So I would agree. If we look at Advocate, we certainly have a different level of sophistication than a small medical practice. But there are some basic tenets that are out there that if we're shared with them, they would be able to act on. And if we see those, we can ignore them if we've already done it. But you have to start at that very basic level and build up, and not just assume that all of the entities are as complex as Advocate. So again, it's starting at that very bottom level, the simplest level, and moving up. So most actionable at the bottom, maybe even, it sounds kind of interesting, at the bottom, but almost the highest priority, because there's simple things that can be done for protection, and then move up from there.
No, because if you look at any of the major hacks and that have happened over the last couple of years, it's always a third company or some vendor that doesn't have the level of sophistication of who the actual target was, and they were able to manage and escalate privileges across their network. Mr. Carano, if I would have to describe what your organization does, it's to be prepared in the event something happens, right? And that's very basic summary, but how are your needs different than some of the other industries? Like, what would you like to be seeing from the federal government in order to be prepared if there is some major disaster that hits Chicago?
Well, one of the things that we're hearing is getting the information in a timely manner. So some of the information that comes in from law enforcement takes time to declassify. So I might get some threat intelligence 30 days after the time that the threat was actually discovered. So I'd say that's one of the things that we need to deal with. We're also using the FS ISAC pretty effectively. The Financial Services ISAC has really become a model for some of the others because it's more mature. There is a great deal of information sharing. Members can submit information anonymously. So I get at least a dozen brand new day zero cyber threat information emailed to me directly, and of course also to the financial institutions directly, to the folks that can take action on those things, whether it be a brand new phishing campaign or some sort of an exploit. So I think that's part of what we really need to be able to do is to share the information more quickly. And maybe as part of CISA, using these trusted intermediaries might be a way to go, like using the FSISAC as an intermediary between the government, since it's already collecting this information. And conversely, when it gets information from the federal government, it can disseminate it very quickly to many endpoints. There's some 5,000 financial institutions that are members of the ISAC.
Gotcha. Ms. Kelly.
I was just curious, where are we compared to other industrialized countries as far as how they deal with cyber attacks as opposed to how we deal with them? Also, information sharing, education, their pool of people that they can pull from because of their talents. You're in all different fields, so whoever wants to jump in.
Well, it's interesting. You look at a country like North Korea, and if a 13-year-old shows aptitude for math and science, they're basically put directly into hacking school, right? So that's certainly one of the challenges that we face. As far as our European counterparts in banking, they've got some very tough privacy laws there that we're also need to deal with on an international basis. But we're hearing from some of the larger banks that are international that they have the same issues with recruiting internationally that we're seeing here. So that's a challenge everywhere.
Anybody else?
I would agree. I've heard, I have peers overseas and in Europe, same complaints, same issues over there. Is really just a different place, different time, but the same problem.
So there's nothing that they're doing that we can...
Doesn't seem like they're any more proactive, and they're not moving any faster than we are. What I will say is there are some European countries that have a better fundamental education. In other words, the science and math education is much better at the start. So should they get students that are at least interested in the discipline, at least the basic foundation's already there. So we lack a little bit more in that. But in the end, they still have a shortage of people. But the good news is at least that earlier in the pipeline, they actually could address this because they have better preparation than we do.
I ask that also because, I have parts of my district where we still need to increase the broadband, where your GPS goes out or your phone doesn't work. So that's some of the more rural parts of my district have to still deal with. I didn't know if their governments were doing anything that you thought we should adopt here.
Not in particular. We do have some, in addition to what the gentlemen were saying, there are some interesting situations for global companies dealing in Europe now with the different and moving privacy regulations. So that makes it's just a lot of unknowns of how that's going to evolve and then how you need to respond to that. So that is another thing that's out there in global transactions. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I yield back and thank you for being here.
Dr. Santos, something we talked about, you mentioned early in your remarks, BYOD. This is not just a unique challenge for educational institutions. This is a challenge for all companies, and where your employees feel like they should be able to work across any device, wherever they are, and what work needs to be done, what research needs to be done on the philosophy of BYOD and how you handle the cybersecurity challenges of that.
Well, I think just one quick difference with BYOD in a private corporate setting versus in a university is that, as we said, we do have visitors coming in. It's not as if you are given a piece of equipment that has already been put with the latest software and whatever, and is controlled by the IT department. These are just devices that are coming in unknown. So that is a very big difference in trying to be cyber aware and handling cyber threats. A lot of these issues is trying to be able to determine how to more effectively guide people in understanding what are cyber threats. If you're going to be bringing in an unknown device, you should have some level of savviness of knowing what you're doing with it and whether you're creating a threat or not, and how you might unwittingly create a problem. And that's part of the issue that we're being faced with, is that cybersecurity is always going to be an issue. Technology and human beings are intertwined in all of this. There's a lot of work in technology trying to determine, how someone can crack a system, do all these kind of things. But without the effort in trying to really understand and guide people on how to understand what threats are, you're going to have a lot of problems, right? And I actually think that that's one of the most key things that needs to be done.
Have a strong password over 14 characters and don't click on stuff you don't know where it came from, right?
Well, that's part of training.
Yeah,
That's part of training.
It's pretty basic, but people still violate that. I have two final questions for Ms. Hatta, but before we get to that, Dr. Santos, any final remarks or anything that you would like to add that came up today?
I do want to go back to some of the issues that we brought up with education. And I believe Representative Kelly had brought up what other countries do, and a number of people on the panel have brought up that a lot of other countries in Europe and Asia have much more well-developed STEM at the early stages, and also have very specialized curricula as you go through into college. But one of the things that we are seeing at Illinois Tech is that we are actually getting students overseas that are coming to Illinois Tech because they do not see the capability of being able to get graduate degrees in cybersecurity that are on cutting edge topics in cybersecurity, and the availability of that. The other thing is, as an academic, I always want to stress that we need to take a look at looking at basic research on trying to move forward new problem-solving paradigms to handle cyber threat and cybersecurity. And lastly, we also need to take a look at how to effectively engage the diversity issues that we have in technology, such as each university, such as Illinois Tech, are developing our own types of camps and things that have been very successful. But it's now time to really take a look at how we can break through all these silos.
Mr. Carano, anything you wanted to add that came up, or parting shots?
Oh, just a couple of items. The legislation deals with multi-factor authentication. The financial services industry has been moving in that direction. I think that's an important next step in cybersecurity, and we're also concerned about mobile device and emerging threats with mobile banking and how those devices are used for trading. So that's going to be something that we're keeping an eye on. And then finally, with all the risk assessments,